I now request Dr. Srikumar Banerjee, Chairman, Department of Atomic Energy, to take the chair and conduct the next session.
The next speaker is Dr.R.Chidambaram. He's going to talk on research and innovation. To this audience, Dr. Chidambaram doesn't need an introduction. Still, very briefly, let me mention that he is the principal scientific advisor to the Government of India, who has earlier been the chairman of Atomic Energy Commission, and currently he has been looking at the broader aspect of science research in the country. Very recently, his initiative has resulted in the creation of the National Knowledge Network. Trained as a solid-state physicist, crystallographer, and material scientist, has made very important contributions to the nuclear science and nuclear technology community in this country. Dr. Chidambaram, please.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for the kind introduction. First, I must congratulate the Science Congress President, Dr. Geeta Bali, and her colleagues for putting together an excellent program. We had some very good lectures this afternoon. In fact, that itself is an indication of some of the dimensions of science and scientific research. I myself am a basic research scientist. Most of my career was in basic research, neutron crystallography, and high pressure physics. And there the interest was that in X-ray crystallography, where you look at biological molecules in particular, you can't see the hydrogens because only one electron doesn't scatter X-rays too much. And on the other hand, the most pervasive interaction in biology is the hydrogen bond. Hydrogen bond. And it is pervasive because it's flexible. It's not as rigid as a covalent bond, not as non-directional as the van der Waals interaction. And hydrogen can be seen very easily in neutron scattering. That's why in neutron crystallography, you look at the precise stereochemistry of hydrogen bonds in smaller molecules, amino acids, and then transfer that information. In fact, one is particularly interested in the active site of proteins, and one is able to transfer the information from neutron diffraction in order to decipher the mechanism. What is the mechanism of the enzyme or the protein? So that was the link there. But in the case of high pressure physics, so we heat a material, by the time the temperature goes up by 20 degrees or so, it has melted. Whereas pressure is a much better parameter. You can squeeze a material to half its volume, even less. You can do it by shock waves, you can do it under diamond anvils. And in that case, you can get a very large number of phase transitions. And this is what we were studying. And also one can look at what we call the equation of state. How does the density change with pressure? It's a fascinating thing in its own right in basic research. But on the other hand, it is one of the most important inputs if you want to design a nuclear weapon. How does the density change under shock wave conditions? Then, of course, from basic research, it started drifting to nuclear technology, various aspects of nuclear technology. So why I gave this introduction was, I have seen both sides of science, basic research, as well as technology. That's why I thought I'll talk to you today about research and innovation. Research and innovation. Research involves generation of new knowledge. And innovation involves adding economic value, strategic value, or societal benefit to knowledge. even knowledge not generated by your own country. Japan was very good at this in its early stages of development after the Second World War, the automobile sector, or optics, or shipbuilding. Now, of course, it has got some of the best facilities for basic research. And here, when you talk of research, you must look at all its dimensions. Basic research, highest intellects in a country must be allowed to work on fundamental problems of their choice. You don't ask a Raman or a Ramanujan, tell them why you are working on whatever you are working. But you must also do what I have been calling directed basic research. It's not applied research, still basic research, but directed towards those technologies, related to those technologies, which any kind of technology foresight analysis tells you that it is important for the country in the long term, to Indian industry, to Indian society, to the Indian strategic system. Then applied research, mostly we think of it as related to proprietary product development, process development, but also we can do what we call pre-competitive applied research, related to generic problems in any industry. We started from our office core advisory group for pre-competitive research in the automotive sector. Here you look at things like alternate fuels, combustion, lightweight alloys, hydroforming. This is not related to any particular product. And as India develops, as India becomes more and more globally competitive in various technologies, it has become very important for us to think in terms of pre-competitive applied research. And that can be supported by the government. Similarly, in innovation, you can have product innovation, you can have process innovation, you can have design innovation. There is a feeling that in terms of creating economic value, process innovation can trump product innovation. Process plus design can trump process alone. In the old days in drugs, before the patent laws changed, India was very good at finding out new processes producing the same molecule. Our IT services sector has been very good in process innovation, and so on. Now, this is an article I wrote some years back, that India is so diverse, India is so large, that there is no field of science and technology from which it can absent itself. But how much it invests in any field at any point of time, that's a matter of wisdom. You must go for strategic industries, you must go for large enterprises, micro and small enterprises, you must go for rural enterprises, and each one of them needs a different approach. You must also have what I call, innovation today, communication, electronically and physical connectivities. Physical connectivities, electronic connectivities have improved so much that you have what we call collaborative innovation. That was a theme of the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2008, which I attended as a member of the faculty. Essentially, companies sharing intellectual property rights after producing something jointly. But there are things like pandemic diseases, climate change threat. If you have a solution for any of this, in principle, this is what I said there, you should not wait for making money out of this, but this kind of collaborative innovation should become altruistic. The World Wide Web was a good example developed by the Center for European Nuclear Research. WWW is an excellent example of altruistic collaborative innovation. Linux, open source, which Samir talked about. I've sometimes told him OSDD falls in that kind of category. See, innovation is not only in India. People are beginning to feel that there's a lot of knowledge around which has not yet been converted for benefit of society. This was a paper which came in the March of Nature. And what this man talks about is that after the Second World War, the United States led the world through the Department of Defense's central role in technology development. And why it succeeded, DARPA, the Internet. Internet came through the Department of Defense. Then, of course, it spread all over the place. The focused mission and its role as an early customer for advanced technologies. Early customer for advanced technologies. Now, our own mission-oriented agencies, atomic energy, space and defense-related, particularly in those areas which came under the technology control regimes, where we had no option but to develop it ourselves, they had a similar experience of becoming the first introducer of new advanced technologies. Now, if you are going to run scared of new advanced technologies, you can never become a knowledge economy. Proven technology. Many people feel we should have proven technology. That's fine. But as I say, proven technology beyond a point is a synonym for obsolete technology. Somebody is offering you the latest technology, or you have developed the latest technology. You should not be afraid of putting it in, or in whatever products or processes. If you develop something, somebody has to use it for the first time. And you say you want to become the global leader, knowledge economy, global leader in science, global leader in innovation. Are you going to hang to the coattails of somebody, let him use it first, then we follow him? That is why, if you want to, in this area, it becomes very important to do to be the first introducer of new technology. Fortunately, in this listing of manufacturing competitiveness, see, the IT services, software services has taken us up to a point. And it's good, it's created wealth for the country. But the future growth of the country is going to be driven by the manufacturing sector. And here, this analysis by Deloitte and the US Council on Competitiveness ranks India second after China in terms of manufacturing competitiveness. And the reason they give for it is talent-driven innovation. Our human resource talent is our greatest asset. And that is one we should make use of to become a global leader in science. See, if you take India's technology needs, it ranges from nuclear to rural. We have our 3-stage program, which we are aware of. We need inclusive growth. Prime Minister is talking about inclusive growth with the rural and of course women also. Dr. Chidambaram was very particular mentioning inclusive growth. Now, one of my definitions of a developed India, is when the quality of life in rural India becomes comparable to the quality of life in the non-urban areas of already developed countries. It's not enough for a small segments of pockets of India to develop. But rural India must develop. That is what is meant by inclusive growth. Really, the border between urban and rural India is deprivation, accessibility to services. If those two are removed, then of course Both of them will come up. And then this question of patterns and priorities in Indian R&D. Patterns and priorities. What are the metrics of measuring the success of science and technology in India? Basic research you can easily measure by papers, by publications, high impact factor publications. Industry-oriented research you can measure by looking at patents or innovations. Patent is a cold metric. By the time you take a patent, several years have gone past. But what the companies are looking at are innovations which are currently being converted into wealth. We have reports from my office on both of these. How do you measure the success of research and development in rural and agricultural development? Much more difficult. Much more difficult. It's not by papers alone, not by patents, but something beyond that. This report was written by the Swaminathan Foundation on one of the parameters they use were catalytic technologies. What are those catalytic technologies which can be introduced and which can lead to the growth of the country? Rural development, anecdotally we hear of many things, but scaling has been a problem. Success is dotted all over the place, but how to multiply it for the whole country? Much more difficult to gauge the success achieved in high technologies. What is the measure, what is the metric for the fact that our pressurized heavy water reactors totally indigenous? What is the metric for the Space Department has put a satellite around the moon and has got excellent information which also tells you about the existence of water on the moon, or the Department of Defense developing some of their excellent missiles which they have done. It's much more difficult. We have not been able to find yet a suitable. This is an innovative reactor, advanced heavy water reactor. This is given to me by Director of BAC, Sina. It is, India's 3-stage program. Thorium, which will come in the 3rd stage, has already been introduced here. It is very advanced. It is considered one of the few advanced reactors in the world. In the sense it has passive safety features, not just active features which are engineered. It has a high lifetime. And the introduction of thorium and uranium-233. While the uranium-233 burns, equivalent amount of thorium is converted to uranium-233. That's why, as you can see, it has got a very high design life of something like 100 years. So you can think of these examples, the nano car and this and so many others. I was a member of this commission appointed by the Director General of the IAEA. We gave a report in 2008. And there we said that the two of the greatest challenges of the 21st century are going to be energy security and the climate change threat. You heard from Professor Swaminathan some of the problems in agriculture which can be caused by, I think, global warming, at least for the southern hemisphere. Energy security, of course you talk about sustainable development, retaining of natural resources beyond the present generation. Energy security means that you must develop energy technologies which are minimally carbon dioxide emitting. Renewables, nuclear, hydro. And even if you burn coal, you must make sure that you minimize the amount of carbon dioxide that you emit per megawatt that you produce. A National Action and Plan on Climate Change, which the Prime Minister referred to in his speech this morning, has all these components which have been included. Now, from the Fukushima accident, lessons have been learned. Technically, it shut down when this earthquake came. But the height of the tsunami, the post-shutdown systems got incapacitated. So what all countries in the world they have done is to ensure that not only in terms of tsunami, all the regulatory boards have reviewed, all leading nuclear countries, that in the case of extreme events, highest possible, what you can imagine extreme events, the post-shutdown cooling system, because some radioactive is still left, which has to be continuously removed, these systems must operate. And they have all passed the test. September of this year, 6 months after the Fukushima, the General Conference in Vienna, International Atomic Energy Agency, total support for atomic energy. No country is going to stop its program. No country is going to shut down its old reactors. Few countries here, and these are countries which already have a very high standard of living. Whether they introduce a new energy producing system, nuclear or otherwise or not, their quality of life is not going to be affected. Two countries which have the technology, which have the human resources, which have huge energy demands, are India and China. India and China have to pursue their nuclear program if they have to improve the quality of life of the people. The Chinese representative made a very interesting statement in the Vienna conference. He quoted an old Chinese proverb. You know, the old China, the proverb about they used to get choking because of fish bones. They eat fish and they get choked. The old Chinese proverb says, you don't stop eating because of the fear of choking. You only make sure you do not choke. That is what safety features are all about. See, essentially it boils down to the Human Development Index. Human Development Index has been defined by the United Nations in terms of 3 parameters, which I have given there. I have been saying for 20 years that the same thing can be redefined in terms of just 2 parameters: per capita electricity consumption and female literacy. I prefer female literacy to adult literacy because it's a measure not only of literacy but of equity and justice in that society. India will not become a developed country until it becomes near 100% literate without gender discrimination. This is one part of it. And secondly, both the parameters, per capita GDP is obviously related to per capita energy production or consumption. But health parameters are also related to per capita electricity consumption. You introduce any energy producing system, part will go to industry, part will go for urban consumption, but a part will also go to small towns and villages. They'll get better drinking water, better sanitation, better primary health care, and all these have an impact on health parameters, including the ultimate parameter, which of course life expectancy at birth. So 2 of those parameters, per capita GNP and life expectancy at birth, can be replaced by just 1 parameter, per capita electricity consumption. And I'll show you in the next slide. This is a slide which I have been modifying over the years. Per capita electricity consumption plotted against the Human Development Index. Now this is an S-shaped curve. And India is somewhere there. India is here. India of our dreams is there, at least at the cusp of the curve. If you want that India should be among the top 10 in Human Development Index, even with an austere style of living, that means it has to go up by 6 to 8 times per capita electricity consumption. per capita electricity consumption must go up by 6 to 8 times. Talking of 1 million plus megawatt being produced in the country. All technologies are important for India. Next 20 years it will be mainly coal, though we may go to advanced ultra-supercritical thermal plants slowly. High temperature steam, higher the efficiency. So lower the amount of coal that you burn for producing the same power. Renewables are important for India. Solar, though it's intermittent. At the moment costly, but we are all hoping the prices will come down. Wind, hydro, from large hydro to micro hydel plant. But even if the climate change threat is not there, there is just not enough fossil fuel in the world to satisfy the energy demands of India and China. That is why it becomes important to go to nuclear as an important, inevitable option. Now in this curve, as you can see, I have plotted some numbers. They are the female literacy numbers. If the female literacy is higher than the average, then you find that Human Development Index is higher. Because female literacy correlates very strongly with infant mortality. I think Professor Kuaf Khan mentioned about this. About this factor. And if the female literacy goes lower than the average, then the Human Development Index tends to come down. Each point there is one country. That's what I said. You know, the fact is, every state in India, female literacy is lower than male literacy. And the larger is the difference if the average literacy is lower. The higher the literacy, the difference between male and female literacy goes down. That's why it's very important. Two conditions we must satisfy if India is to become a developed country. Number one, near 100% literacy without gender discrimination. And number two, raise the per capita electricity consumption. And now let me come to the, and of course if you achieve all that, you need efforts in both research and innovation. You know, till some time back, the community in India, the scientific community in India was divided into these two people, shown by the pink circles, the purple circles. People who work in academic institutions and people, scientists and technologists worked in companies. And the culture was very different. Because as you know, Kenan Sahin from MIT wrote a paper in 6-7 years back. If you take the chain research, development, delivery, universities are good in research, companies are good in delivery, both are poor in development. That's why we need to have academia-industry interaction, strengthen that. And that is why we started this pre-competitive applied research. And before that, you must have directed basic research. This is an additionality to conventional self-directed basic research, which I mentioned, which must encourage. Government is encouraging that. And also our participation in large projects like the Large Hadron Collider, looking for the Higgs boson, that completes the standard model. Our participation in ITER, which is the thermonuclear experimental reactor. As I said, we should be there everywhere. We are there also in the Geneva experiments, also with what coming out of the detectors. This additionality to that is directed basic research in those related to those technologies areas which India considers important in the long term. If you are doing protein crystallography, you start working on all the proteins related to, say, tuberculosis. Not that we are asking you to develop an alternative cure for tuberculosis, but at least you create the knowledge base so tomorrow somebody can find the right inhibitor molecule. That's what I mean by directed basic research. You can think of any one of the technology areas in which India is predicted through a technology foresight analysis likely to become a leader in the long term, and then you direct your basic research towards that as an additionality. These people, the highest intellects, allow them to do whatever they like, participate in ultimate structure of matter, origin of the universe, or whatever in that type. See, if, unlike some of the predictions, as you can see, of course, Dr. Ramasamy has been saying it all the time. Our publication rate, of course, he has got much more statistics than I have. This is the Thomson report. As you can see, it was stagnating a little bit up to 2000. Then it has begun to rise. This is basic, as far as basic research is concerned. That's why the Thomson Reuters says India's recent year-by-year growth has begun to increase sharply. Because when they come to China, they say spectacularly. They are also increasing, but they are increasing much faster than what we are doing. That's what I said. Our technology needs range from nuclear to rural, and each one of them you must look at it differently. In the case of nuclear and space and defense, the things are already very, very strong. The interactions are already very strong. Pre-competitive applied research, we started, as I mentioned to you, for automotive. Then we did for machine tools. Now we have started one for electronics hardware. Micro, small and medium enterprises, they must be given RDI support. TIFAC, we are doing that. CSR has a NIMITLY program, of course, is also offered different, and apart from SCRC, DST has TDB and TIFAC. TIFAC here is looking at technologically homogeneous clusters of MSMEs and providing them RDI support to a proximate academic institution. Rural enterprises, you must look at it in a completely different way. And for example, it's mentioned it is about this recharging of aquifers. We brought in the Uttarakhand area the BRC scientists to use isotope hydrology in order to help in recharge of the aquifers. You know, that water, when the rainwater harvest, goes through broken rock to the aquifers. But they don't know when they build it whether it will go to useful aquifers or will it go away to useless places. That you can find out by taking samples of water at various heights. Because when it seeps through broken rock, the isotopes fractionate. And by studying that, you can tell them that you can put your subsurface dikes at these points and water will flow the way you want. The aquifer that you see on the right was a dry aquifer. Now it has started showing water. The average recharge of the aquifers has gone up by 3 times. And now it has been so successful in this Gauchar area. I went there and I talked to one of the women. She said till last year I was walking 2 kilometers to fetch water. But now I am growing vegetables. Sure enough, she was growing vegetables there. This is getting now multiplied. See, there is another problem in rural development. We started from our office what we call RUTAG, Rural Technology Action Group, which is what I call an open platform innovation strategy. Open platform. In the sense that what is applicable for hilly areas is not applicable for coastal areas. That is not applicable for plains areas. And also the rural innovations don't seem to diffuse beyond 50-100 kilometers. Because the lifestyle changes, habits change, raw materials change. And unlike some of the branded products, very little advertisement takes place. Cost of technology transfer may exceed the cost of re-innovation. This is the term I started using. Re-innovation once the concept is understood. See, this term re-innovation has been used by Roy Rothwell 25 years back, but that looks almost synonymous with incremental innovation. Broadly, you talk about breakthrough innovation, you talk about incremental innovation. Chinese use this term Re-innovation in a very different sense in high technology. Introduction, absorption, digestion and re-innovation. With the aim of developing what they call independent intellectual property rights. I use the word re-innovation in the context of transferring the concept and re-innovating it using local raw material or local raw materials, local skills. Within the country, because it's not, once you get a high speed gigabit per second network, it's a low latency network. Very quickly the information goes up and down. And one of my colleagues in BRC uses the synchrotron source to do protein crystallography experiments sitting at Bombay. He sends his crystals, taken up by robotic arm, brought to the X-ray beamline at ESR of Grenoble. The data comes over, he chooses which crystal is the best, which orientation is the best, and then the data comes streaming in. The advantage is the whole team is watching. It's not just. So I think India's e-infrastructure is changing very, very rapidly. The e-science infrastructure. And this is also changing. You know, in the case of a developed country like the United States, there is a thermodynamic equilibrium between the knowledge in the academic system and the knowledge which has been transferred to industry. A guy like me who was a basic research scientist, mostly, wants to be in equilibrium with the academic system of the United States. Otherwise, how do I get my papers and physical review letters and get my promotion? Indian industry was a couple of notches lower. This is what caused a disconnect between the Indian academic system, which I showed you in the pink circles, Indian industry. But India is moving up very rapidly. As the gap closes, I'm very sure the academia and industry will begin to react, interact, and if the industry wants something from academic institution, some kind of qualified people, PhDs or whatever, they must tell them 8 years in advance. Suddenly you go and ask, you give me a PhD in this, there is no such PhD. Give them, tell when in advance on the basis of your own analysis. So now I come to my last slide, Mr. Chairman, this is my very last slide. See, having said all this, the ultimate truth is, it's not a half truth as you said. The ultimate truth is science is done by scientists. Science is not done by committees, conferences, speeches and all that. And if you want top class science to be done, talented young people must be attracted to careers in science. It's as simple as that. And we must have plans so that in whatever areas we consider important, young people are attracted. For them, you must give them a career assurance. Our nuclear training school was career assurance scheme, and a very broad-based Inspire scheme which Prime Minister mentioned this morning of the Department of Science and Technology is an excellent initiative to attract a large pool from which will emerge the talented people we are talking about. And then there are the gifted. I'll close with that thought. There is a difference between talented and gifted. Talented are those whose innate abilities are already converted into achievements. Gifted are those where this has not yet happened. And we have a pilot project run by Dr. V.S. Ramamurthy in NIAS, and you have to get them very, very early. Sometimes even it's easy to find sports and music very evident. Science and mathematics, it's not very evident. Unless you identify, nurture it, that giftedness begins to go down. And among those gifted, there are those who are moderately gifted, those who are highly gifted, those who are profoundly gifted, to which I have added profoundly and selectively gifted. Prime Minister mentioned Ramanujam this morning. I don't think Ramanujam will pass any exams we are holding. No joint entrance exam of IIT or any other entrance test. But his profound giftedness is hardly in doubt. He will fail in every other subject except one subject. So I think we should also think of how to identify such profoundly gifted. Thank you very much.